On August 31st, 1888, 43-year-old Mary Ann Nichols was walking the streets of Whitechapel in London's East End. It was just after 3 a.m. when she encountered a man in the shadows of Bucks Row, a narrow cobblestone street lined with warehouses and slaughterhouses. What happened next would spark one of history's most enduring mysteries and launch the legend of the world's first modern serial killer. Mary Ann's body was discovered at 3:40 a.m. by Charles Cross, a carman on his way to work. Her throat had been slashed twice with such force that she was nearly decapitated. But it was the additional mutilations to her abdomen that would become the killer's signature, precise, deliberate cuts that suggested anatomical knowledge. The police surgeon who examined the body noted that despite the brutality of the attack, there was surprisingly little blood at the scene, suggesting the killer had medical or butchering experience. As news of the murder spread through the narrow streets and gin houses of Whitechapel, few could have predicted that this was merely the beginning of a reign of terror that would grip London and captivate the world for over a century. Jack the Ripper is arguably history's most infamous serial killer, not because of the number of victims, which was relatively small, but because of the perfect storm of circumstances that transformed these murders into a global phenomenon. Operating in the cramped, poverty-stricken streets of Victorian London's East End during the autumn of 1888, the Ripper terrorized one of the world's largest cities while taunting police and press with letters that may or may not have been authentic. The combination of brutal methodology, mysterious identity, and media sensation created the template for how we understand serial killers today. The Whitechapel district, where the murders occurred, was a world unto itself, overcrowded, impoverished, and largely ignored by London's authorities until the killings thrust it into the spotlight. Over 78,000 people were crammed into less than a square mile, with many living in doss houses that charged 4 pence a night for a bed. Unemployment was rampant, sanitation was virtually non-existent, and violence was commonplace. For the hundreds of women who turned to prostitution to survive, the streets were already dangerous long before the Ripper appeared. Just 8 days after Mary Ann Nichols' murder, the killer struck again. On September 8, 1888, 47-year-old Annie Chapman was found dead in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street at approximately 6 a.m. Like Nichols, Chapman's throat had been cut, but this time the mutilations were far more extensive and precise. The killer had removed Chapman's uterus and part of her bladder with what the police surgeon described as anatomical knowledge and surgical skill. The murder scene revealed disturbing details about the killer's methods. Personal belongings had been arranged in a neat row by her feet: 2 combs, a piece of envelope, and some pills. This ritualistic behavior suggested the killer was not acting in a frenzy, but with deliberate calculation. More unsettling still, witness testimony placed the time of death at around 5:30 a.m., meaning the killer had performed his gruesome work in a small backyard with houses on all sides, in broad daylight, without being detected. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the divisional police surgeon who examined Chapman's body, made a chilling observation. The work was that of an expert, or one, at least, who had such knowledge of anatomical or pathological examinations as to be enabled to secure the parietal portions of the body. This assessment would fuel decades of speculation that Jack the Ripper possessed medical training. As panic began to spread through Whitechapel, the Metropolitan Police launched their largest investigation to date. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline was assigned to lead the case, bringing with him years of experience policing the East End. But the investigation faced enormous challenges. There was no fingerprinting, no forensic science as we know it today, and no systematic approach to profiling serial killers. The police were essentially inventing investigative techniques as they went along. The killer's ability to vanish without a trace after each murder baffled investigators. Whitechapel's maze of narrow alleys, courtyards, and interconnected buildings provided countless escape routes, and the killer's apparent familiarity with the area suggested local knowledge. Adding to the confusion, the East End's residents had little trust in police and were often reluctant to cooperate with investigations. On September 27, 1888, the investigation took a dramatic turn when the Central News Agency received a letter written in red ink and signed Jack the Ripper. The letter, dated September 25th, read, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. The next job I shall clip the ladies' ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly." This letter introduced the name Jack the Ripper to the world, though its authenticity remains disputed. Many experts believe it was written by a journalist seeking to sensationalize the story. But regardless of its origin, the letter transformed the case from a local crime story into an international media sensation. The persona of Jack the Ripper, taunting, articulate, and seemingly educated, captured public imagination in ways that simple crime reporting never could. The letter's prediction about cutting off ears would prove prophetic, though. Whether this was genuine foreknowledge or simply coincidence remains unknown. What's certain is that the media attention surrounding the letter and the Ripper name put enormous pressure on police to solve the case quickly. On September 30th, 1888, the killer demonstrated his escalating confidence by committing not one but two murders in a single night, what would become known as the double event. At approximately 1 a.m., 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride was found with her throat cut in Dutfield's yard off Burner Street. However, unlike the previous victims, Stride showed no additional mutilations, leading investigators to believe the killer had been interrupted before he could complete his ritual. The interruption may have come from Louis Diemschutz, who discovered the body when he returned to the yard with his cart. The killer had likely heard Diemschutz approaching and fled, but rather than retreat for the night, he moved approximately half a mile to Mitre Square in the City of London, outside the Metropolitan Police's jurisdiction. At around 1:45 a.m., just 45 minutes after the first murder, the body of 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes was discovered by Police Constable Edward Watkins. The mutilations inflicted on Eddowes were the most extensive yet. Her face had been deliberately disfigured, her abdomen opened, and her left kidney and uterus removed with surgical precision. The killer had also taken a piece of Eddowes' apron, which he used to wipe his hands before discarding it in a nearby doorway. Above the discarded apron, someone had written in chalk, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This message, known as the graffito, was discovered at 2:55 a.m. by Detective Constable Alfred Long. Fearing the message might incite anti-Semitic violence in an area with a large Jewish population, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered it erased before it could be properly photographed, a decision that would be criticized for decades. The double event marked the peak of the Ripper's activity and the height of public panic. The fact that he could kill twice in one night, in different police jurisdictions, and still escape undetected seemed to confirm that London was dealing with a criminal unlike any seen before. 3 days after the double event, the Central News Agency received another letter, this one written in a different hand and signed Saucy Jackie. The letter, postmarked October 1st, claimed responsibility for the previous night's murders and included a chilling detail: "I was not codding dear old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number 1 squealed a bit, couldn't finish straight off, had not got time to get ears for police." More disturbing was a package that arrived at the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee on October 16th. The package contained half a human kidney preserved in wine, along with a letter signed from hell. The letter read, "Mr. Lusk, saw, I send you half the kidney I took from one. Women preserved it for you, t'other piece I fried and ate, it was very nice. Doctor, Thomas Openshaw, pathological curator of the London Hospital Museum, examined the kidney and determined it was human from the left side and showed signs of kidney disease consistent with Catherine Eddowes' condition. However, the kidney's preservation and the fact that similar specimens were readily available to medical students led some to dismiss it as an elaborate hoax. For nearly 6 weeks after the double event, Whitechapel remained quiet. Police patrols were increased, vigilante groups formed, and hundreds of suspects were questioned. Then, on November 9, 1888, the killer committed what would be his final and most horrific murder. Mary Jane Kelly, a 25-year-old Irish woman, was found dead in her single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street. Unlike the previous victims, who were killed quickly on the streets, Kelly had been murdered indoors, giving the killer unlimited time to perform his most extensive mutilations. The crime scene was so horrific that it was described by investigating officers as resembling a slaughterhouse. Kelly's body had been systematically dismembered. Her face was rendered unrecognizable. Her breasts had been cut off and placed on a nearby table, and her internal organs had been removed and arranged around the room. The killer had built up the fire in the grate, possibly to provide light for his work or to burn evidence. The level of mutilation suggested the killer had spent several hours with the body. The Kelly murder differed from the others in several significant ways. Kelly was younger than the other victims. The murder took place indoors rather than on the street, and the extended time allowed for far more extensive mutilation. Some investigators wondered if this represented an escalation in the killer's behavior, while others questioned whether it was the work of the same person at all. After the Kelly murder, the Jack the Ripper killings abruptly stopped. No more bodies were found with the characteristic throat cuts and precise abdominal mutilations. No more taunting letters arrived at newspapers. The most famous serial killer in history seemed to simply vanish, leaving behind only questions and theories that persist to this day. The investigation continued for months, with police interviewing thousands of suspects and following hundreds of leads. The case files eventually grew to include over 2,000 pages of reports, witness statements, and correspondence. Yet despite the largest criminal investigation in London's history up to that point, police never identified a definitive suspect. Several patterns emerged from the investigation that helped establish the foundation for modern criminal profiling. All 5 canonical victims were women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel. All murders occurred on weekends or holidays, suggesting the killer had regular employment. The progressive sophistication of the mutilations indicated someone with anatomical knowledge who was becoming more confident with each killing. The ability to disappear without trace suggested intimate knowledge of the East End's geography. Police developed several theories about why the murders stopped. The killer might have died, been imprisoned for another crime, committed suicide, or left London. Some investigators believed the killer might have been confined to a mental institution. The abrupt cessation of the murders was as mysterious as their beginning. The case attracted numerous confessions and accusations. Over 100 people confessed to being Jack the Ripper, though none could provide details that weren't already public knowledge. The police dismissed most confessions as attention-seeking or mental illness, but the sheer number demonstrated the case's grip on the public imagination. Because of the magnitude and enduring fascination with this case, hundreds of suspects have been proposed over the decades, ranging from members of the royal family to prominent physicians. The lack of forensic evidence and the passage of time have made definitive identification impossible, but several suspects have attracted serious scholarly attention. One of the most frequently cited suspects is Montague John Druitt, a barrister and part-time schoolmaster, who committed suicide by drowning in the Thames in December 1888. Druitt was named in private police notes as a suspect, and his death coincided with the end of the murders. He had medical training through his family connections and was known to suffer from mental illness. However, There is no direct evidence linking him to any of the crimes. Dr. Francis Tumblety, an Irish-American physician with a history of arrests and a known hatred of women, was arrested in London in November 1888 on charges of gross indecency. He fled to the United States before trial, and American newspapers reported that London police suspected him in the Ripper murders. Tumblety possessed surgical skills and was in London during the murder period, but again, no conclusive evidence exists. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-Jewish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel, was identified by name in police files as a suspect. He was known to suffer from mental illness and was eventually committed to an asylum. In 1895, senior police official Sir Robert Anderson claimed that the Ripper's identity was known and that he was a Polish-Jewish immigrant who was protected by his community. Some investigators believe Anderson was referring to Kosminski, though the evidence remains circumstantial. Police memo, having regard to the fact that the murderer was living in the immediate vicinity of the murders, and that he had peculiar knowledge of the streets, it is highly probable that he was a local resident. More recent investigations have focused on George Chapman, born Severin Klosowski, a Polish immigrant who worked as a barber and was later executed for poisoning 3 wives. Chapman lived in Whitechapel during the murders and had surgical training from his time as a barber surgeon's assistant in Poland. Inspector Frederick Aberline, who led the original investigation, later stated his belief that Chapman was Jack the Ripper. However, the dramatic difference in methodology, from brutal stabbing to subtle poisoning, has led many experts to dismiss this theory. The case has also attracted more exotic theories involving members of the British establishment. The royal conspiracy theory, popularized in the 20th century, suggested that the murders were connected to a cover-up involving Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria. This theory has been thoroughly debunked by historians who have shown that the prince was not even in London during most of the murders. Patricia Cornwell, the crime novelist and forensic expert, has championed the theory that Victorian artist Walter Sickert was Jack the Ripper. Cornwell has spent millions of dollars on DNA testing and historical research to support her theory, including purchasing several Sickert paintings to test for DNA evidence. While her investigation has revealed some intriguing connections, the forensic evidence remains inconclusive, and most Ripper experts remain skeptical of the Sickert theory. The challenge in identifying Jack the Ripper lies not just in the passage of time, but in the limitations of Victorian investigative techniques. There was no crime scene photography, no systematic preservation of evidence, and no understanding of psychological profiling. The police relied primarily on witness testimony, which proved unreliable in the dark, narrow streets of Whitechapel. Modern forensic techniques have been applied to surviving evidence with limited success. DNA testing of letters allegedly written by the Ripper has yielded inconclusive results, partly because the letters were handled by numerous people over the decades. Advanced photographic analysis of crime scene images has provided new insights into the wounds and the killer's methods, but has not revealed the murderer's identity. The Jack the Ripper case established many conventions that persist in serial killer investigations today. The systematic cataloging of evidence, the development of suspect profiles based on behavior patterns, and the coordination between multiple police jurisdictions all evolved from lessons learned during the Whitechapel murders investigation. The case also demonstrated the power of media coverage to shape public perception of crime. The dramatic newspaper headlines, the publication of letters allegedly from the killer, and the creation of the Jack the Ripper persona all contributed to a level of public fascination that transformed a local crime story into a global phenomenon. Perhaps most significantly, the Jack the Ripper murders occurred at a crucial moment in London's development as a modern city. The contrast between the sophisticated gas-lit streets of West London and the medieval squalor of Whitechapel highlighted the extreme inequalities of Victorian society. The murders forced the city's elite to confront the conditions in which London's poorest residents lived, leading to social reforms and urban improvement projects. The victims themselves, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, have often been overshadowed by the mystery of their killer's identity. Yet their lives tell the story of Victorian London's most vulnerable residents. All 5 women had fallen into poverty and prostitution through a combination of personal tragedy, economic hardship, and social abandonment. Their deaths highlighted the dangers faced by women with few options in a society that offered little support for the destitute. Today, over 130 years after the murders, the case of Jack the Ripper continues to generate new books, documentaries, and theories. The killer's identity remains unknown, and barring the discovery of compelling new evidence, it likely always will. Yet the case's influence on criminal investigation, popular culture, and our understanding of serial crime ensures that Jack the Ripper's place in history is secure. The Autumn of Terror in Whitechapel created the template for how we think about serial killers. Mysterious, intelligent, and always one step ahead of the authorities. Whether this image reflects the reality of the historical Jack the Ripper or is simply a creation of Victorian media and modern imagination remains one of criminology's greatest unsolved questions. The legend of Jack the Ripper has outlived the man himself, whoever he may have been. In the narrow streets and fog-shrouded alleys of Whitechapel, a killer created one of history's most enduring mysteries, ensuring that the autumn of 1888 would be remembered not just as a time of terror, but as the birth of the modern serial killer phenomenon.